Game number one, we are playing the white pieces in this one. And it starts with one e4. This is called the king's pawn opening. It prepares to develop the bishop and the queen right off the bat. So it's a quick way for white to try to get castled. And this is one of the best opening moves for beginning players. Black meets it with pawn to e5. It's the same benefits of pawn to e4, but in reverse. So black's looking at maybe getting the bishop out and getting their queen out pretty early. Now we play knight to f3, and we're going to talk about this game as if we are playing the white pieces. So I'm going to say we quite a bit because I want you guys to put yourselves in the shoes of the player that's shown on the bottom of the screen. So we're going to walk through this together and explain every single move. But as we go throughout the games, I'm going to stop repeating some of the ideas from the earlier games. So knight to f3. What we're doing here is what's called developing the knight. We're getting that knight out. And this knight attacks squares in the center. So from f3, the knight attacks this e5 pawn, and it attacks the d4 square. It also has 8 different squares in total that it sort of touches, right? So when the knight's on its starting square, back on g1, it only touches 3 squares, but from f3, it touches 8 squares. So you want to get your pieces to the middle and attacking as many squares as possible. Our opponent plays knight to c6, defending the pawn with the knight. This also develops a piece for black. So a general rule in chess is to get your knights developed before your bishops, right? So you see how both sides bring their knights out. Next, you'll bring the bishops out. Usually this is the case, but not always. And the reason for that is a lot of times the bishops need to guard these pawns on g2 and g7. So it makes a lot of sense to bring the knights out first and then decide later where to bring out the bishops. The bishops can kind of be vulnerable pieces out in the opening as well, whereas the knights are pretty safe when they sit on these squares defended by pawns. Now at this point, what black wants to do is try to get castled, but they have 2 pieces in the way. We want to get castled, and we have 1 piece in the way. Now, in the game, we play knight to c3. You could also bring out this bishop. They're both good moves, but the idea with knight to c3 is similar to knight to f3. This knight on c3 wants to control center squares. And center control is a big aspect in chess, right? You want to early on get your pieces developed, control the squares in the center. And what you can do is you can sort of count how many times each side attacks the center squares. So let's focus on d5. We attack it with a pawn and knight. Black doesn't attack it at all. So you can think of that as 2-0. We're leading the control of the d5 square. And you can do that for all of these other center squares. So while you're thinking of moves, try to think about which squares each side attacks. Now, at this point in the game, this is called the 3 knights opening. We have 3 knights that are developed with the 2 king pawns. You don't need to know the opening names at this point, but sometimes it is nice to know the names of the openings so that as you start to progress and people talk about different openings, you can start to think, oh yeah, I know that position because I have a name attached to it. Bishop to c5, played by our opponent. The knights and the bishops are called minor pieces. So usually what you want to do in the beginning is develop your minor pieces and then castle your king. So black is developing another minor piece, getting ready to castle soon. Now we spot a little tactic. Tactics are combinations of moves that can lead to different things. Sometimes it can lead to a checkmate. Sometimes it can lead to winning material. Sometimes it's just sacrifice a piece and you get something back. So in this case, we are giving up a knight, which is worth 3 points. Knights and bishops are worth 3. For a pawn, it's only worth 1 point. Now, our opponent takes it back. So if you look up above the board, you see there's this +2 where my mouse is. Technically, black is up 2 points. They're up 1 knight for a pawn. But now we have this move, pawn to d4, and this creates what's called a fork, double attacking the knight and the bishop at the same time. So it's a simultaneous attack. This is called a fork, F-O-R-K. Black retreats the bishop and defends the knight. And now we are able to take on e5. And after the bishop takes back, we regained our material. So material is just a word that's encompassing all the different pieces on the board. We regained our 2 points of material. So now we're back to an equal position. And if you look at sort of the control of the center here, black has the one bishop on e5, but we have the pawn on e4, the knight on c3. Our queen's opened up on the what's called the d file, and both of our bishops are open on their diagonals. So I should note the files are the letters. So A file, B file, C file, and the ranks are the numbers, first rank, second rank, third rank. So you want to develop as quickly as possible, and we're trying to develop more quickly than black here, and we're in a good position to do it because these bishops are already opened up. There's no pawns in their way. Bishop to c4, and now black has to watch out because the bishop targets this pawn on f7. This is a common idea in chess openings, and a lot of chess tactics are based on the pawn on f7 and the pawn on f2. And the reason for that is because those pawns are usually only defended by a king, so they can sort of be soft spots. Another thing to keep in mind in chess is loose pieces drop off. Now, what's a loose piece? A loose piece is a piece that is unprotected, or sometimes it's a piece that's attacked the same number of times that it's protected. In this case, the bishop on e5 is a loose piece, unprotected. Our bishop on c4, also a loose piece, unprotected. We're going to try to take advantage of this. We're already looking at ideas like queen to d5, threatening queen takes f7 checkmate, and threatening the bishop on e5. So black plays knight to f6, developing the knight, preparing the castle, also attacking some of the squares that our queen was targeting, h5 and d5. Now, the first inaccuracy from our side, we play queen to e2. It would be better to simply castle right away. It's important to note you want to castle your king early and you want to castle often. So always just look to get your king to safety. The king is almost always safer on the sides of the board compared to being stuck in the center. And you also want to make sure that you don't castle into an attack. So that's a case where you could break the rule of castle early and often. If your opponent has a ready-made attack set up where you're about to castle, be aware of that. So here black castles, the best move for black. We castle, which is also the best move. And with our kings on the same side, that means that we're going to more likely have a quieter game. If the kings castle on opposite sides, it's advantageous for both sides to just launch all of your pawns and pieces at the opponent's king. But when the kings are on the same side, you want to keep the pawns close to your king for your own king protection. So when the kings are on the same side, you'll tend to get a quieter game. Now here, our opponent plays d6, getting ready to develop their last minor piece, the bishop on c8, also securing the loose piece on e5. So we play knight to d5. And now that we have most of our pieces activated, developed, we can start to move pieces twice. And what we're doing here is we're playing for what's called the initiative. The initiative is when you're the one dictating the action, you're creating the threats, and you get your opponent reacting. It's harder to react to threats than it is to create them. So that's the spirit behind this move, even though there's no serious threat yet with the knight heading to d5. Another thing to keep in mind in chess, it's a game of mistakes. It's a game of blunders. And a lot of times what players want to do, especially adult improvers, they want to play very passive chess because they don't want to make any mistakes. And they think, well, if I make no unforced errors, how will my opponent ever beat me? But that's the wrong mindset to have. Because what happens in chess is the side that has the initiative is the side that creates tough questions for the other player. So you want to be the one that creates tough questions for your opponent. You don't want your opponent creating all the tough questions for you. So you want to look to play active, look to play for the initiative, and not make too many mistakes at the same time. So here black decides to take the knight, trading off a set of knights. Equal material, a trade doesn't tend to favor either side, but when one side is up material, Usually that's the side that wants to trade because it simplifies the win and reduces counter chances from the opponent. So we take. At this point, there were two options for us. We could take with bishop or pawn, but this is a nice move because the bishop points at b7 and f7 at the same time. Queen to h4 by black. And heads up, we have a tactic alert. Queen takes h2 is a checkmate. So always kind of watch for your opponent's threats, especially when they make a move like flying their queen out towards our king. Watch for their threats. Now we choose an active move. This pawn is defended by bishop and rook. Hits this bishop, blocks the diagonal. Keep those moves in mind in your own game. You want to look to defend actively as well. Now, one thing to keep in mind here, and this was played in the game, bishop to d4 check. Moving the f pawn does open up our king, so you want to be careful with these sort of moves. But in this case, we knew the king was safe because we can tuck him over on the h1 square, and there wasn't quite enough follow-up for black. So king to h1 played. You could also block with bishop to e3, but let's look at that real quickly. Bishop to e3, there is bishop takes b2. And this is a common idea. When you have like a free b pawn, you can sometimes give up the pawn, attack the bishop, and then when it retreats, the other b pawn is actually attacked. Bishop takes b7. So this would have been a safer way, I think, than what was played in the game, to simply just block that check immediately with the bishop, give up the b pawn, and win the b pawn back. But king h1 played in the game, a little bit scary because the king has no safe squares, but white is able to handle this pretty nicely. Bishop g4, which side has the initiative? It's sort of black for now, but we're going to turn the tables and start to show our superior playing ability in a few moves. Queen to d3, moving the queen, attacking the bishop, getting away from that g4 bishop. And here, c5 was played. First mistake of the game. Dropping the bishop from d4 back to f6 was actually the strongest move. And the reason it's a mistake playing pawn to c5 here is because the pawn on d6, this guy, becomes a backward pawn. Backward pawn is when a pawn is not defended by its buddies on the adjacent files. So that pawn is a potential weakness. If black had played bishop back to f6, we could take b7, but then they could play actively, take b2, getting back to equal material, and at least black is fighting more here than in the game line. So in the game line, black played pawn to c5. We go pawn to c3. Best move in the position. It defends the b2 pawn from the attack of the bishop, and it forces this bishop on d4 to retreat. Well, instead of retreating, we see the first blunder of the game, bishop to f2. Black thought that was a good move. And this is where we could talk a little bit about the chess.com classification system. A blunder gets a double question mark usually. A brilliant move gets a double exclamation point. A mistake gets one question mark. An inaccuracy gets a question mark and an exclam. And an interesting move gets an exclam and a question mark. And an excellent move gets an exclam. So there's kind of like a grading scale on chess.com. This gets a double question mark. That's a huge blunder. Now, we play g3. We find the critical tactic. The problem is that bishop gets trapped on f2. So this was sort of a loose piece, right? It's only attacked. It's attacked once and only defended once, I should say. So that cues us in to look for a way to try to trap that loose piece. g3 is the way to do it. Loose pieces drop off. Now let's take a look at how to convert this endgame. Bishop takes g3 can be met by queen takes g3. So at first you might have noticed this pawn on h2 is actually pinned to our king, meaning if bishop takes g3, there's no h-pawn takes back. You cannot walk into a check like that. But bishop takes can be met by queen takes. So now queen h3 played in the game. This creates a very tricky threat. If it's black's move again, bishop to f3 checks our king. And after the queen takes f3, there's queen takes f1, checkmate. So we got to be careful. Let's just show it. A3, let's say, really bad move. Check, take, checkmate. So in the game, we play rook takes f2. We secure the free bishop. We're up 3 points of material, and now there's no danger in the position. All right, so how do we convert this game? Rook a to b8 played by black. Bishop to e3. Good move for us, and what we're doing is we're preparing to get this other rook into the game. Pawn to b5. Black is trying to make something happen. When you're in a lost position, a good strategy is to try to attack your opponent and create even more threats. Make the game messy. That's what black is trying to do. So we offer this queen trade. We are up 3 points of material. Now we get to see that rule come into play. When you're up material, look to trade down. Simplify the game. Decrease your opponent's chances to fight back. Queen h5. Black is smart to avoid the queen trade here. They want to keep attacking us. So we go f5. This is kind of a cool move. Trapping that bishop on g4. We're trying to trap that other bishop for black. Black attacks our queen. We move her. Again, going for the queen trade. Black says no trade for you. So we got to find a new square. If we keep repeating queen f1, bishop h3, and they go back and forth, the position repeats 3 times. It's called threefold repetition. That leads to a draw. So we don't want to put the queen back on f1. Queen d2. A new safe square for us. This also lines up with the backward pawn on d6. Now black plays rook f to e8, developing their last rook. Bishop to f4. So we're threatening bishop takes d6. We're plus 3 points, trying to make it 4 points of material. And because we're creating more threats playing for the initiative, maybe our opponent will make another blunder. Black defends the pawn. Bishop to c6. Look at how we just keep attacking, applying more pressure, creating threats. You create threats, good things tend to happen. Not only are we attacking that rook on e8, we're attacking the pawn on b5. Only safe square for the rook. Now, at this point, black wants to avoid what's called an exchange sacrifice. Sometimes it's just called an exchange. An exchange is trading a 5-point piece, a rook, or a 3-point piece, a bishop or a knight. So if we're able to take the rook and black takes back, if it's done on purpose by black, it's called sacrificing the exchange. Otherwise, it's just called winning the exchange. So we would be winning the exchange if our bishop was able to trade for the rook. Now we play queen to d3. We're playing it safe. Our queen guards our pawn so that our bishop is free to take here, because we do see that the black rook attacks that pawn. We want to keep him defended. Rook to c7 played. Black leaves this pawn undefended on b5 for the moment, but it's a difficult position for black to play. This pawn is also double attacked by bishop and queen. So we pick up this pawn on b5, and now if we look at the scoreboard down here, we see a +4. We're up 4 points of material. We're up 1 bishop and 1 pawn. Black's rooks are both passive. How is black going to fight back here? First, they play h6. The idea with h6 is if a piece gets to the back rank, the 8th rank, let's say a rook or queen. If a rook or queen gets to the back rank, sometimes that can lead to what's called a back rank checkmate, which means the king is in check, has no way out. So a move like h6 creates an escape route for the king later on, watching for a back rank checkmate. This is an important thing to note. I have fell for back rank checkmates a couple times recently, so it's something that I need to be aware of myself, but try to always make room for your king to escape if there's a potential for a back rank mate. Queen c2 played in the game. I'm not sure what the plan is, but I'm thinking white wanted to just get the queen off of the d file where that black rook is sitting. Bishop to f3 check played by black. We have a simple way to meet it, king g1. Queen h3 played. Black makes the final blunder here. I think he was hoping for some sort of queen to g2 checkmate, but we have both rook and queen guarding it. So here we played rook takes f3 in the game. We're up 7 points of material, and black resigned here. So one thing we're going to do with all of these games is recap with just a couple key takeaways from the game. So the opening name was the King's Pawn opening. That's the first kind of takeaway. Developing pieces is important in the opening phase of the game. You also want to keep an eye on center control. That's an important aspect of the game, especially in the opening. A fork is a tactic where two pieces are attacked simultaneously. Material count is something that can give you sort of a rough idea of the scoreboard and which side is winning. Leading in things like mobility, development, and center control. All of those make it more likely for your opponents to make mistakes. Also, loose pieces are pieces that are not protected by other pieces, and they can tend to lead to problems if you have loose pieces. Castling is an important idea to get your king to safety. You want to castle early and you want to castle often. You can only castle once in each game, but often just means in most of your games you want to castle. And moving the queen too early is often not recommended because she can be attacked by lower value pieces as they start to develop and move to stronger squares. So that's game number 1. I hope this game teaches you something and you have these ideas soaking in. Feel free to go back in the video or open up the PGN file that comes with this course and play through some of the lines again. Because what you can start to do if you repeat a game multiple times, you start to predict the moves for white. And these ideas start to meld with your chess intuition. So over time, you just start to recognize natural moves more quickly. All right, we'll see you guys in game number 2.